Greetings, and welcome to the Bowling Green First United Methodist Church. We hope you enjoy what you're about to see, and you can find us at the corner of Broadway and Church Streets at 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings, or you can find us online at bgmethodist.org and on Facebook at Bowling Green First United Methodist Church.
So we are, you'll see one place in your bulletin where it says one sermon title on there. This was one of those weeks where I gave all that information to Pam, and I looked back at it later and went, that doesn't make any sense. So I changed the title on it. It says, instead now the title is, What Did You Say? And I'm taking that because you all know, and I know, that I have a tendency, as I have just demonstrated, to trip over my words on occasion. Sometimes what that is that my brain gets ahead of my mouth, or more often than not, my mouth gets ahead of my brain. That sometimes happens. And many of you all know what it's like. You know what it's like when that happens. You kind of trip over your words. But have you ever stopped to think about what it is that people are hearing when we are saying things? Because sometimes what happens is that sometimes we get confused, or sometimes we just don't really understand anything of what it is that is being said. And sometimes it just comes out as sounding like gibberish, even though we may perfectly well understand what we're trying to say. What someone else hears is very different than that. And so if you want just for another minute to kind of crank your necks back around up there, we've got an example of what that is like to hear something that really isn't up there.
You gotta eat the breakfast. You eat breakfast. Then not cheap. I have flaps.
So you kind of get what it's like sometimes, but what we're hearing is gibberish. We know that there is something important that's supposed to be going on there, but we're not hearing anything that's being understood. Now that's kind of understandable, and that actually happens a lot. Sometimes, even if we know how football is played, we can look out on the field and go, I have no clue what anyone is saying right now. But a lot of times it happens in other situations. We do that a lot in the church. In that, sometimes we'll say things, and we won't be quite sure what it means. So this is the point where I have a public service announcement to make. And that is that if you ever hear me say something that you don't understand, stop me and ask me. Because what happens a lot of times is that, especially if you've been in the church for any length of time, we know that there are certain things you say in response to other things. Whether you really understand what you're saying or not, that just is what we do. And so stop me and ask me and say, well, can you explain that a little bit more? Because I don't quite know what you're meaning there. And then either I will stop and explain, or I'll stop and say, I have no idea either. And then we'll try and work it out from there, what it is that is actually going on. So that's your public service announcement for today. If you don't understand something, stop and ask a question, because more than likely, I may not know what you're talking about either. So, but the other part of it is sometimes things are just kind of gibberish. But then on the other hand, though, we've got times, though, when things really are, when we find things are offensive, or we are troubled by what it is that's being said, and then we've got to figure out, where do we go from here? Because it's not that we don't understand. We understand perfectly. It's that we don't like what it is that we're hearing. Now, I say all this morning because of, when we get into our reading out of Ephesians, there is part of that, there are a couple places that really stuck out to me. And one of those is in the first half of verse 29. It says, don't let any foul words come out of your mouth. Now, in our reading for this morning, out of other translations, it may say something a little bit different. They're all basically meaning the same thing. Don't let any foul words come out of your mouth. But the problem is we stop there. That is just half of a verse that we stop with. And we stop with that, and then we're stuck with trying to figure out, now, what do we do with that? Because we don't have any definition or any context for that. So we then set out about defining what it is that foul means. And the trouble for us is that when we do that, what kind of foul are we talking about? Are we talking about something that is foul smelling? Are we talking about a chicken or a bird that happens to be a foul? Or are we talking about a foul in football when someone goes off sides or does anything else that they aren't supposed to do? Or are we talking about something else that is foul? There's any number of definitions that we can use, but we have lost that context when all we take is the first part of that verse. Or later on in Ephesians, before this in Ephesians, we had part of verse 26 says, "Don't let the sun set on your anger." Now, you all have heard that before, "Don't let the sun set on your anger." Or you may have heard it phrased this way, which is, "Don't go to bed angry." I think that is advice that is probably given to every new couple ever that has just been married. They're given that advice. Don't go to bed angry. Now, there's nothing too particularly wrong with that advice, except that at times when we've done this, we have said, we have taken that to the next step, and we've said, rather than "don't go to bed angry," we have just said, "Don't get angry." And that's where the problems come in. And that's the way that we have taken that for a lot of times. Folks will do that. And the problem is that's taking that out of context. Because we have this part of a verse that says, "Don't let the sun set on your anger," or as the Message translation of the Bible says, it literally says, "Don't go to bed angry." Now here's the trick though. When we put that together with all of verse 26 and verse 27, it says something very different. Instead it says, "Go ahead and be angry. You do well to be angry, but don't use your anger as fuel for revenge, and don't stay angry. Don't go to bed angry. Don't give the devil that kind of foothold in your life." That's verses 26 and 27. So we went from "don't go to bed angry" or "don't get angry" to all of a sudden, "go ahead and be angry." Context is really key here. But what's really important in all of this is what it is that the writer of Ephesians is trying to get across to us. Is that, one part of it is we can't just take little snippets out of stuff, because when we get things all mixed up. But the other part of it is it's not so much certain things that are bad in and of themselves, but it's our intent behind them. Our intent behind what it is that's going on. In the case of anger, he says, "Go ahead and be angry, that's okay, but watch out for this." Because the writer of Ephesians knows something. He knows that anger can be an incredibly transformative power for positive change. It can do a lot of good when directed into the right ways, but he also knows that it's really easy for it to devolve into something that is bad or harmful or evil, and so we have to be careful. We have to ask ourselves, what is our intent and what it is that we're doing? And this becomes clear even more so when we go back to this idea of foul language. Now, I'm sticking with the idea of foul language because if you're like me, you grew up and it didn't take you very long to figure out what that list of words were that you weren't supposed to say in public. Many of the words on that list being probably 4 letters long. We knew what foul language was because we knew how many times our hands got smacked when we used those words until we stopped using them. When we were growing up, we know what those words are. The problem is those are just words. Instead, we see something very different when we take this verse in context. All of verse 29 says this: "Don't let any foul words come out of your mouth. Only say what is helpful when it is needed for building up the community, so that it benefits those who hear what you say." There's the key there. The words themselves really aren't all that important. The words themselves have no power on their own. It's what we are doing with those words that becomes important. What is our intent behind using those words? Are we using it for harm, or are we using it to build up the community that is around us? Now, to give you an example of what I'm talking about here, there is one of my favorite pastors out there. Her name is the Reverend Nadia Boltzweber. She is a Lutheran pastor of the Church for All Sinners and All Saints out in Colorado. And if you see a picture of her sometime, you'll probably recognize it's her. She is covered in tattoos. She's tall. She's about as tall as I am. And she looks very kind of intimidating when you see her in person. And she cusses and she uses language that we would say is probably inappropriate in the Midwest, but she uses that from the pulpit in her church. And for her, in that context, it is completely appropriate. But here's the reason why. She is reaching out to a group of folks that have been traditionally disenfranchised or left out of many churches. These are folks that have problems with churches in many places that they have been to before, but when they come to her church, they find what it is they need. They find what it is that they are looking for. They see in her a reflection of themselves, and they say, this is something that I can deal with. This is something that I can be a part of. And she has changed many lives by pastoring in the way that she does. But that's appropriate for her context because it builds up the community. Now, it might not be quite so appropriate for us here in the Midwest in Bowling Green. That might be a little bit of a shock and not necessarily a pleasant one for us here, but for there it works. And again, the intent is not the words themselves that we are using, but the intent is, why are we using them? To what purpose are we using them? Are we building up the community around us, building up the folks around us with the things that we say or the things that we do? So here's the application part of this. There's two things to remember. The first one is to worry less about the words that we use. The words themselves aren't as important as sometimes we try and give them power into being. Instead, worry more about why we're using them. Ask ourselves, why are we using these particular words? Why are we using them in the way that we are? And in fact, this is what we see Jesus do. Jesus used his words to that same effect. He was using words and he was using language that probably would have been very offensive to a certain group of people in the area that he was in. Primarily to the religious leaders at his time and other folks that saw what he was saying as taking power away from them. It would have been very offensive, but to the people that he was preaching to, they saw it as empowering. They saw it as giving them hope and promise. They saw it as him helping them to find purpose in their lives. Even if their lives didn't change all that much, he was giving them something that they could hold on to that they didn't have before. And he managed in the process of that to start a movement that has lasted now for 2,000 years. Something that's lasted for 2,000 years, I don't know if we call it a movement anymore. I think we call it something that is firmly established. And he did that through the words that he used, that some may have called and said that was foul language, but he used it to build a new community. This is the place we find ourselves. This is the direction that we find ourselves in the middle of. And so this is where we kind of go from here. And it's not just the words that we use. I use this example of foul language because that's something we're all pretty familiar with, but it applies in so many other places. It's not words, things, actions. Some things, they don't have a whole lot of meaning on their own. It's how we used it. It's how we use them. Are we using those things to build the community, or are we using them for harmful purposes? That's the question we've got to ask ourselves. And we go through that, and there's an easy way of getting to kind of the end of this. We go back to Psalm 19. The most well-known verse from Psalm 19 that we have is the last verse, verse 14. That kind of puts all of this into perspective, and it acts both as a prayer and as a call to action. Hear again these words from the end of Psalm 19. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Let us go and seek that out, and seek out where God has called us to be. And let the words of our mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in God's sight. Let us go and do that in his name. Amen.